It's Dr. T, and in this episode, we're answering the question, what is privatization and why should I care about it? First, what is privatization? Well, it's when you move work or the provision of services of some sort out of government control and into the hands of typically a for-profit corporation or organization. And these are services that benefit the public good. So something we would look to government to try to give us. This idea has been around for a while. Ronald Reagan, in his term during the 1980s, really accelerated this trend and this idea. He did a lot to demonize the federal government in particular. And he's famous for saying the 9 most frightening words are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So this idea that government was inadequate, inefficient, incompetent, those are typical complaints that we often see about government. And so the logic is that profit motive will cause competition. That means that the best services will win out. It will also drive down prices, create efficiencies. So that's why people look to privatization. It's supposed to save taxpayers' dollars in the long run and shrink the size of government, which people on the political right have long wanted to do and see as a good in and of itself. Major areas of privatization historically have been at the local level, things like trash, sanitation, ambulance services. I remember when I first moved to a place where I had to pay for trash services, and I was surprised. It's something that always just was part of the federal government, but it was about this time frame that happened. At the federal level, there are, again, examples of privatization we can look at. Under both Medicare and Medicaid, people have the option of choosing a managed care situation where the government will pay a healthcare provider of some sort, again, usually a corporation, a certain amount of money per year per person. And then the incentive is for the provider to keep costs as low as possible so that they can provide care, but then keep some of that money as extra profit from the government. Other areas of privatization include the kinds of things we would normally think of as welfare, homeless shelters, food banks. There may be not-for-profits that provide services in this area, but for-profit corporations could also do this. Education is one. Charter schools and the school voucher program are part of this privatization, the idea that you would give people a certain amount of money and then they could go choose the school that they go to, and it may not be the public school that's right next to them. That's the whole idea, is you would choose something else. The last big area of privatization is prisons. So we have now at the state level and the federal level situations where the government contracts out to private corporations that builds prisons and then houses and cares for the people who are imprisoned in those environments. So is putting public services in private hands the best approach? Well, the profit motive doesn't always serve the public interest. Take the example of healthcare provision. We've talked already about this question of, is it even right or moral that people could make a profit out of denying people healthcare that they might need? So people might not get what they actually need if the profit motive is introduced into a service. It can also set up perverse incentives, and this is most clearly seen in the privatization of prisons. If you have a prison, the way you make money is by keeping the prison full. People who own prisons have worked with organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council. This is a right-wing political group that has written laws for both states and at the federal level that have been widely adopted to keep people in prisons. The 2 best examples of this are the minimum sentencing guidelines. So this is how you get 10-year sentences for a small amount of marijuana possession. The 3 strikes and you're out laws, where you have 3 felony convictions and you don't get to come out again. Those didn't exist until this recent decades when we had this privatization of prisons, because now there's an incentive to try to keep people in prison. Other perverse incentives are ICE detention camps. The Trump regime is now rounding people up and holding them indefinitely without due process as part of its immigration policy, and is paying for-profit places to hold people. So they have an incentive to keep people there as long as possible. The Trump regime also wants to push school vouchers and make them available for religious schools. In the past, separation of church and state has made that impossible. Now they want to use vouchers to allow people to take money from public schools and give it to private religious schools to help fund them. What that will do is transfer wealth, transfer money to people who are already wealthy enough to pay for religious schools out of pocket. It will just put money back into their pockets. People in favor of this argue that it will help poorer families. It will not help poorer families because the vouchers do not cover all the costs of private education. And there is no transportation. Public schools provide transportation to schools. Religious schools, for the most part, do not do that. So it's not going to help poorer families have choice. It's just a way to put money into wealthy families that choose religious instruction and to transfer millions of dollars from our public school system to religious institutions. And it will gut the public education that we have relied on in this country. Why else should we care? Privatization really removes accountability from these essential services. In some case, there's a monopoly or an oligarchy, just a few places that will provide these services. There's really no accountability other than the marketplace. And if you don't have a lot of choices, particularly if it's a monopoly, if it's just one place that's providing, say, your public water or your public sewer, there's nowhere for you to go to make a change. If we don't like what our government's doing, we can petition the government for change. We can vote people out of offices. It is a lot harder to put pressure on corporations and get them to change.